So hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in and listening to our Interfaith Conversations here. I am here with Wendy Goldberg, the interim Executive Director of Tri-Faith Initiative in Omaha, Nebraska, and Dr. Kurt Johnson. I'm going to encourage you to check out their bios and links to all of these amazing things that I want you to look at in the comments below. This is an important conversation for our time, and I'm so honored and pleased to bring Wendy here during this auspicious week. It's the 7 days of rest, and the theme for this year is radiant diversity. And I couldn't let this week go by without talking about religious diversity and bringing in the voices and the lessons learned from the interfaith and interspiritual movements. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Good
yes.
To see you.
Yes, thanks, Kurt. So Wendy, I would just love for you to start, if you would, by just sharing a little bit about who is the Tri-Faith Initiative, how you got started. I love the story of the parking lot and where you're at today and the vision for the future as well. So can you just share a little bit about Tri-Faith Initiatives?
Sure. So the Tri-Faith Initiative was a response to 9/11, and following that moment in our history, Rabbi Aryeh Azriel, who was the rabbi of our Reform congregation in Omaha, Nebraska, decided to go to one of the local mosques with a few other members and stand in solidarity so that vandalism wouldn't happen to the building. And the message in that was that they didn't necessarily speak. They didn't go there to pray. They didn't go there to fix anything. They just showed up. And in that message, what I learn and hold with me every day about the work that we're doing is to be present in each other's lives. So from there, we learned the great power of relationship that could grow out of being present at one of the most important turning points in our history. And so because we showed up for the Muslim community of Omaha on that day, we began to build relationships and trust. And out of that, when we realized that we wanted to move our congregation from its current location, this Reform congregation has been in Omaha nearly 150 years. We were established in 1871. And the story of our congregation dates back to being in relationship with Standing Bear. So we have a legacy of being in relationship with the religious other, and this was just a continuation of that. And we thought, well, what if we know we're looking for land? What if we were intentional about creating a neighborhood of people that would intentionally bring together houses of worship to know each other, to daily interact with each other? And so, over a course of 13 years, we looked for land, we built trust and relationships, we would meet monthly, and the clergy, the lay leaders of what was first a group of some business leaders from the Muslim community decided to start their own mosque that is currently the American Muslim Institute, together with this deeply rooted Reform congregation, and we decided we needed a Christian partner. We invited the Episcopal diocese. We invited some other Christian partners who weren't ready and didn't have the capacity along the way to join us, but ended up with the Episcopal diocese as a partner for about 9 years. And ultimately, they didn't have the capacity to build a church as part of the development on the Tri-Faith Commons, and ended up giving their seat up to a United Church of Christ Church, Countryside Community Church, in 2013. And they were able to go through a beautiful discernment process to move their congregation. The fruits of all of these labor is that Omaha is incredibly generous in terms of building bricks and mortar, and believing that this audacious task of building 3 faith institutions on these different parcels of land is possible, and that we were able to fund that. None of the buildings have mortgages. They are all paid for, and the congregations themselves all participate in the Trifaith Initiative, which is a separate 501c that is building an interfaith center. And the idea of the interfaith center is it's a place where we can have a welcome center for someone who's never been in a church or a mosque before, or a synagogue perhaps. They could come. These are civics groups, these are thought leaders, and they come to the Trifaith Commons and have an experience to be exposed to the religious other. And what we know is that even while we want to increase religious literacy, the opportunity to meet and hear the narrative of the religious other is what is factually the neuroscience of changing the behavior of fear. And we want to build more love and less fear.
Mm. Well, I can't think of a better prescription for our world today than really learning from you as a collective community right there in the heartland. It's really an endearing story. So Dr. Kurt Johnson, my co-host here, he's one of our global leaders of the interfaith and interspiritual movement. And Kurt, I'm wondering if you have any questions for Wendy.
Well, I just wanted to say it's really, such a privilege to be here, and then such a privilege and actually quite a thrill to learn about what you're doing out there. I was just looking at your website, and, the parallels, I could think of 5, which just warm my heart. But, I'm here at the Interfaith Seminary in New York City for 15 years, and my parallel career at the American Museum of Natural History in ecology. And then also I sit on committees at the UN, particularly Spirituality, Values, and Global Concerns, and the International Day of Yoga. But when you mentioned indigenous peoples, then also we have to give a big hello from the Center for Earth Ethics here at Union Theological Seminary, which we established with Corinna Gore, which is so active with First Nations religions. And then lastly, it's interesting that you have built that center, and recently we had a conference in Crestone, Colorado, where again, from a UN land grant of a number of years ago, there are 13 retreat centers from 13 different traditions that are all side by side on that land and doing something very similar. So it's exciting to see, as the world goes global and we have this challenge of how we can live in a global civilization where everyone's welcome, these are the models that need to be there. So you all and your work it's historic, and it's super important as a model for the only kinds of ethics and relationships that will give us a healthy future. So congratulations, and a thrill to be here.
Thank you, Kurt. Wendy, I'm wondering if you could address, we're going to welcome some of the members of the different faiths here in a little bit. But before we do, can you share with us what challenges, we all can probably imagine what some of those would be, but what have been the greatest challenges, and perhaps what has been the most valuable and effective strategy for overcoming these challenges and really building mutual trust, respect, acceptance in this community?
The biggest challenge, over the course of time, our biggest challenge were the people beyond us, right? So the media, the headlines, the snippets of information that don't necessarily have merit. And that's something that our whole society has to deal with. What is, who are our thought leaders, and where are we resourcing our information, and what do we believe about what's being said on any given day? Shared definitions is another challenge for us. How do we define religious freedom? And how is our administration defining religious freedom? Those are challenges of our current day that we need to understand and respect, that religious freedom is something that people on all sides of the political aisle appreciate and want, that we all want the freedom to be able to practice our faith as suits our own needs. And then the changing religious landscape. Those are all, just questions of our time. But I would say, in terms of our relationship building, how do we create a collective impact and not always land at the lowest common denominator, right? And so an example would be Like if we're having a conversation about that we're having a Shabbat dinner, and the Shabbat dinner would be hosted in the synagogue, and we are inviting our Muslim neighbors to come to Shabbat dinner, and they do not participate in anything that will have alcohol served. However, it is a Jewish ritual to use wine for a kiddush blessing. So how do you navigate these two differing religious needs in the same space and build a container that is safe for both of the communities to participate in? And it takes conversation, it takes pre-planning, it takes being innovative and taking risks, and to realize that what we're doing isn't an experiment, and that we might try it one way one time and think, we got some feedback on that we should think about doing it a different way the next time. And that we don't have to have all the answers. There's not someone who's done exactly what we're doing here before. And so we should give ourselves permission to be wrong, and to admit that it didn't work out as we had hoped, and to pick up our toys and come back in the game again. And there are so many iterations where the culture is really quite different of expectation between each of our congregations for what does it mean to be a member of a church versus the mosque doesn't have membership, they have followers. And so our expectation of participation is different. And how do we leave enough space for each of us to be our authentic selves in our expression of faith?
Wendy, you said, which I think is a real critical element that I want to really presence here. You said, how do we move forward without landing on the lowest common denominator, which really does encourage creativity and innovation. And the theme right now is radiant diversity. And I'm wondering, like the example you gave with the dinner and the alcohol, do you create something even greater than what was there before, or how did you navigate that, and what kind of new, fresh, innovative ideas have come from this?
There are a few things. In the situation of the Shabbat dinner, we marked certain tables that said no alcohol will be served at this table, and other tables that said alcohol will be served at this table. And we had a separate table that had a place for the ritual kiddush to happen, and people to be able to pour themselves a glass of wine to do that, but not at a table if that was their practice. We also have had challenges that is similar, where we have been more successful doing things where we witness each other's prayer, so that if we were having a gathering of prayer, that we would say, now is the moment for us all to witness this Jewish expression of prayer, and now is this time for us to witness a Christian version and an Muslim expression. But it's not a combination of those things. That when we've tried to do things like have an interfaith choir, then we've taken out our important words and the connections that we independently have to our own rubric of faith and our own rituals. And that leaves everyone feeling a little both unsettled and that we've created a blending of faiths. And we are not intending to blend the faiths. We really want to appreciate that there's more than one way to be in relationship with something bigger than you, and that you can call that divine lots of different things. And that we believe each person should be able to do it in their own way. In the same way, we're very forward in talking about that there are multiple ways to express Judaism or Christianity or Islam. So if you've met me, you've met one Jewish person, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you know all about all there is to know about Judaism. You know a little bit through my vantage point of my lived experience. And that's another really important thing to talk about when you're talking about exposure to the religious other.
Mm. This is beautiful. I have one more brief question, and then I'll see if Kurt has anything to kind of wrap this section up before we invite some of the different community members. But Wendy, I'm wondering, in this day and age, when we're looking at the interfaith movement and where you're at, and in the conversation of radiant diversity, we're looking at diversity as an asset. So in saying that, what might you share with others who are leading an interfaith, interspiritual movement now, moving forward? What might you say to them to really help lead out of fear, lead into that appreciation of the assets of diversity?
Mm-hmm. I think active listening is what we need more of in our life. And so while we all want to learn how to foster empathy, when we talk about empathy, we often talk about being able to walk in another person's shoes. However, I can never fully walk in any other person's shoes. I can only walk beside someone who has had a lived experience that is different than mine. And so I believe that what we have to do is to create space to listen more than we talk when we have the opportunity to meet new people, and to really spend our time intentionally focusing on what it is they're saying, instead of curating what you're going to say in response to what it is that they're saying. Mm-hmm. So just bring your full open heart to whatever it is that a person wants to share, to be in relationship with you. And then if it's something you disagree with, to say, can you help me understand why this is so important to you? And to be open to why it is that they feel so strongly about whatever it is that they're telling you is their truth. And maybe in that you'll be able to hear something you didn't expect.
Beautiful. So Kurt, is there any last question or comment that you may have to kind of wrap this first section up before we invite the community members in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so interesting that everything that Wendy has said has a parallel that we see in the United Nations community and the global interfaith community. And one thing, bringing in the science again, is that the world's religions can ideally be like ecosystems. And in ecosystems, the communities don't do the same things. They do very, very different things. But they're interlaced as an organismic community at the larger level that then has a stability and a sense of harmony and sustainability across the whole ecosystem. And then the last thing I was going to say, because I know we'll get into it later, that we always say that this journey is a journey from the head to the heart, because it's in the head with the history of theologies and worldviews and ideas and end time scenarios that the religions have parsed out differently. But when you go to the heart, and particularly when you go to the mystical traditions, then this understanding of interconnection and wholeness and oneness is right at the center and the heart of that. And then, as Wendy said, the real challenge is when you bring that into day-to-day life, where people aren't in the world I'm in, where I'm spoiled because I'm in this interfaith environment all the time. But people are living day to day with all the stresses of daily life, which is also a parsing environment. Then it's a real challenge of how we make those differences in that harmony. So the good thing, as I said recently in an article, is there's so many champions of this holistic view now in the world. That's one of the big pieces of good news. So it's great to be here with all of you.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you so much. And we are now going to just pause to welcome in some of the community members and introduce you to them and their experience. We'll be right back. Okay, so we are back. Again, this is a special interfaith conversation for the 7 days of rest and radiant diversity. And our theme today is really about diversity, radiant diversity, and how literally religious diversity can be an asset as well. As we look around nature and all of her inhabitants, we often can look at the world and our planet and all the beauty around us and see that as an asset and a necessity of the biodiversity. And we're looking at religious tradition and this beautiful interfaith conversation, and the Tri-Faith Initiative is part of that. So with that, I'm going to open this next part off with inviting Kurt Johnson, Dr. Kurt, to come in and share a story. He is an incredible leader of the Interfaith Interspiritual movement. And Kurt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Julie asked me just to give a quick little introduction and ask the first question. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of here. It's my privilege from the Interfaith Seminary in New York City and committees at the United Nations, particularly the Committee on Spirituality, Values, and Global Concerns, and then my parallel career at the American Museum of Natural History in ecology. So hopefully we're talking about the ecology of religions. And I recently had a chance to spend some days with His Holiness the Dalai Lama at his home in Dharamshala in India. And the reason I mention that is that the word that everybody's talking about now is interconnection. It doesn't matter whether you're coming from science or from spirituality and religion. Everybody now is understanding profound interconnection. And the other word that's being used by His Holiness and Ken Wilber and so many people is wholeness. So wholeness, oneness, interconnection. And what's needed then, we need to ask this question, which all of you have as interfaith leaders, is if interconnection is the reality, and also what is looking at the world we'd like to see as a global civilization, how do we cultivate the welcoming attitude that actually invites interconnection from such an incredible diversity worldwide, and also people that are embedded in very, very different traditions or ways of looking at things. So the story that I was just going to mention, because it came to my mind because of seeing that the Tri-Faith Center is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam there, is that Llewellyn Van Lee, who's the leader of the Silent Sufis, the Golden Sufis, from the Irina Tweedy Daughter of Fire tradition in Islam, tells a wonderful story about the relationship of our true nature and the world we'd like to see. And what he says is that our true nature is like a big valley. So imagine a big expansive valley. And in that valley, we should have a place where everybody, every community can be at peace. It can practice its practice, and where every dress is welcome, every prayer is welcome, every story is welcome, every song is welcome, every food is welcome. And that's in the context of a global civilization that's come to celebrate that diversity and understand that ecology of the religion. So it was in that context then that Julie asked me to ask each of you this first question, and that is, why is religious diversity important to you personally? And Julie, I think you can be referee of who's first.
I think if anyone wants to jump in, we have Rick, Sarah, and Andy here, and whoever would like to jump in, just share your name and just a little bit about you, and then talk about your experience of religious diversity.
One little thing, we have a tradition, and that's that we always go in historical order of the faith traditions. So we always go Jewish, Christian, Muslim.
Beautiful. Okay, I love it. Let's do it.
All right, so I guess that means I'm first. My name is Andy Gordman. I'm currently president of the Board of Trustees of Temple Israel and a member of the Tri-Faith Board of Directors. And I have lived in Omaha my entire life and been a member of Temple my entire life. And I think when you grow up as part of a minority tradition, religion, that, learning about diversity is really important, and that understanding people around you. And, I always, because I was always one of a couple of Jewish kids in my class or my school, got to talk about Judaism, but I also then had the desire to learn about other religions. And as I, continue to learn, I just find it fascinating. And what I find really fascinating is, a lot of the similarities that people think that we're also different, that I think, diversity is great. And I also think it helps you be stronger about your own religion, because you have to learn enough to have knowledgeable conversations.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andy.
I guess that leaves me as number two. I'm Rick McInnes. I am with Countryside Community Church. I'm a former moderator, or president of our congregation, and I'm also currently vice chair of the Tri-Faith Initiative Board. I definitely think it creates a more inclusive community and a culture. It helps to dispel a lot of the stereotypes and definitely the different biases that people have. Religious pluralism is really a norm, and the difference should be an asset and a strength as we celebrate these. We can learn from one another, but I think only after we have a level of understanding from one another. we can see different perspectives in the world in which we live. So I believe that cultural diversity is valuable from many different aspects.
Thank you, Rick. And Sarah.
Yes, hi. My name is Sarah Kasavi. I am the executive admin of the American Muslim Institute. I'm also a member of Trifaith. And regarding diversity, I think it's very important because even in Islam, we have a verse in our Quran that says that God created us in different tribes and nations to get to know one another. So I think it's very important. He could have made us all the same, but we're all different for a reason. And it's very important to learn from each other. Trifaith gives us this opportunity. Our mosque is a partner of the Trifaith initiative, and it gives us that opportunity for everyone to freely practice their religion. And also diversity in our mosque we have a lot of nationalities as well, so it comes like culture and religion, and there's a lot of wide range of people that have different cultures, and they come to our mosque. And so I think it's important being part of the Trifaith initiative. It's very important for us to acknowledge and to appreciate the diversity that we have here in Omaha. And I also agree with Andy and Rick in terms of that it makes our faith stronger. I think Andy's mentioned that when you get to know other faith and learn about other religions, it actually makes you stronger in your own faith.
Beautiful. Well, I'm gonna move us, like Kurt said, from the head to the heart. I'm gonna ask if, and Wendy, you're included in this too, but with the four of you, are there any personal stories that you have in your life of how this experience of interfaith, interspiritual, co-locating, community building, the Trifaith initiative, are there any personal stories that you have that have really changed your life and made an impact on you in any way?
So I had an experience recently that I would love to share. Thanksgiving weekend, my parents were in town, and they loved Trifaith, and they, were members of Temple. They still are, but they don't live here. So they had a real interest in seeing the mosque and learning about Islam. So I called the imam, and we set up a time. And what was really beautiful about this is the Trifaith campus is built on what was a former golf course of a Jewish country club. And it was a Jewish country club because at the time that this country club was built, Jews were not allowed to join other country clubs in Omaha. And so that happens to be where I grew up and had a lot of family events. And so every time I drive on that into the campus, I do think about that. And so we went to AMI, and Imam Jamal gave us this beautiful tour and talked about Islam and had this wonderful conversation with my parents. And to me, it was almost like full circle of having grown up there because that's where our family was with other Jewish families, and now being in that same spot with the Imam talking about what's going on in the world and Islam and what AMI is trying to do. And I just thought, there's beautiful moments in Trifaith all the time, but that's the most recent one that really just filled my heart with joy about where we're at.
Beautiful. I love the analogy of coming home and then coming home. It's like that full circle. Thank you so much, Andy.
With Countryside, we were kind of the last ones to join into the Trifaith initiative formally. And I have to go way back to, I think, the whole discernment process that Countryside went through in order to determine whether we wanted to be a part of the Trifaith initiative. We didn't have to move. Our building wasn't falling down. We weren't overcrowded. We were we were just fine where we are. The building was paid off, all those kinds of things. But as we went through the discernment process, we learned and experienced, I think, the value of what the Jewish and Muslim cultures offer. And that alone opened my eyes. And it was also by the time that I was part of the lay leadership at church. And so all of a sudden, I thought to myself, why wouldn't we do this? And I think the experience that we went through in this discernment to determine whether to join, whether to be a part of that with the rest of the congregation, and what we learned and the friends that we made from both the temple and AMI were invaluable, I think, to how we can look to the future. And I think that in itself made this whole experience just immensely worthwhile, personally, and I think for many of the members of Countryside Church.
Mm. Rick, I hope you documented that process of discernment. It would be a fascinating document to share with the world.
We did, and in fact, our associate minister did her dissertation on this. So it is documented. It was a hard process. I will have to say it was a very hard process. You know, change is difficult for some people, not understanding. But I think the process that we went through to help people make a decision was wonderful. You know, I know there's a lot of people that were kind of nervous or didn't understand why we would do this when we didn't have to. But it was the right thing to do, and it was the right thing for the future, for Countryside, and I think for the religious community itself.
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing, more than just for Omaha and that community, but for all of us. So thank you for going through that tough discernment process.
Well, I think the whole experience really nurtures the heart and the soul. You know, faith is just as important as the air we breathe. Beautiful.
Thank you, Rick. And Sarah?
Yeah, well, just to be able to have the freedom to practice your religion and to pray and to share the message of Islam with coworkers, like it's very, as a personal experience for me, that's what means a lot more to me, because I'm able to talk freely about my religion. I'm able to practice freely on the Tri-Faith campus, and I'm able to go to events, Tri-Faith events, meet other people, learn from them about their faith, about how they practice, and also share my experience. And I think that's very important, because it is very important for us to, like, there's no other workspace that you can actually freely practice your religion and talk about it with no fear. And we talk about everything, and it's surprising for us that we have a lot more commonalities more than differences. Like we have events, Tri-Faith events, that are not necessarily religious, but we do bring sometimes religious topics, and we talk about, okay, every partner, every congregation, tell us how you pray, or how do you do this, or what do you think of that, or human rights from the three congregations, different perspective from the three religions. And there's actually a lot more similarities than we know, than you might think. So I think that's very important. To me personally, that's something that I really appreciate.
Mm. Sarah, I just I want to really pause and let the one element of the workplace sink in, that you're talking about really that religious freedom in the workplace, not just as you're working with the AMI Center, but literally that's another element of this movement that so many are craving and really want that as an expression of who they are all day long, whether they're in the workplace or in their own home. So thank you for presencing that. I think that's another really important element of what you're bringing through.
Yes, I can wear the hijab at work. I can talk about it. I can be asked questions, and I can talk freely. I think that's very important.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Wendy, do you have a personal story that you would like to share?
Well, I think I'm going to counter what some of them said in terms of celebrating what is similar about us. I like to celebrate what is different. And there's a little bit of holy envy in my story. And that is that I had a coworker who was an employee of Trifaith and was celebrating the month of Ramadan. And as I would go to witness her prayer, I went in to witness her preparation for the prayers of the holiday, and watched how she did the ritual cleansing to prepare to bring herself before God. And we don't have a similar ritual. I mean, I guess we do hand washing for Shabbat if you're observant in that way, and my family is not. So it was an opportunity for me to witness and to ask questions about the procedure and the why of the ritual, and then to see what that looked like in the practice for this community, who all enter the prayer space with their shoes off or their head covered, and prepared to be ready for prayer in a way that was worthy of holy envy to me. And I found that the next day, when I was in the shower washing my feet, which was the next time I washed my feet from that moment, I paused to think, what would happen if I thought about the washing of the feet in a sacred way 5 times a day, in the same way that my Muslim friends do? Whether that's during the month of Ramadan or some other time, that was just my moment to be able to witness it. And I think that the privilege of this opportunity that we have on this Trifaith Commons is to see each other's versions of rituals, and to honor that, by me witnessing this, it doesn't make me Muslim. And it doesn't, but it does validate my neighbor's ability to practice that freely. And I think that's part of celebrating religious diversity as an asset, that we have a lot to learn from each other, and how much that deepens our own connection to our own faith, as Andy said. It just happens without you even noticing that it's happening.
Mm. Beautiful. One of the interfaith stories that I had that really moved me and touched me listening to you was about a decade ago, sitting with a woman who was in the Baha'i faith, and she literally gathered all the neighbors together in her home every week, and the children were all there. They learned each other's traditions, they learned each other's prayers, and then they did community service together. And literally they would take something from someone's faith, and it was amazing, all the different faiths that were represented right there in their neighborhood. And they would go into the community and serve, and then come back and talk and process. It was so beautiful. So I'm just imagining what it's like with the children in your community and on that campus, and what their experience will be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. That'll be a beautiful story as it unfolds. Kurt, do you have anything you want to bring in here before we come into what lessons to learn, what these beautiful people can teach all of us as we're moving forward about fear right now? I want to just see if there's anything else you want to drop in here.
Well, the story that I was reminded of was the participation I was able to have for about 2 decades with Father Thomas Keating's Snowmass Interreligious Initiative. And I think many of you know from that came the book, The Common Heart, 2007, which elaborated the 9 points of agreement among the world's religions, which is actually now a foundational document at the UN. But as a part of that gathering, where there were supposedly, were great esteemed leaders from across the religions, and Dalai Lama, many others. But for instance, he would have us pretend to be each other. And when we would pretend to be each other, that brought a lot of laughs. But he also asked us to confront each other on the wounding that each tradition had historically done to the other. that was difficult because all of us there, more as peacemakers and loving people, we didn't want to come from that place, but he challenged us to do it anyway. And what happened was I tell you, tears, tears, tears. There was so much crying in that room when people acknowledged what had been done in the name of those traditions to each other in the past. So I've never forgotten. I really believe that without that artistic connection that unfolded between those real people in real time, that effort, which bore so much fruit globally, would not have been as effective. And when I was with the Dalai Lama in November, I gave him a letter from Father Keating that Father Keating wrote on his deathbed, which has not been made public yet. But I could say it, everything we've said in this conversation is in that letter, along with the entreaty of we must find a way to make this really happen. That what we're talking about here should be a model for the whole world.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you. This is a beautiful model. And hopefully those watching and witnessing this conversation today can really take that to heart and look at creative ways that we can begin to look at religious diversity as an asset, as really a necessity. So with that, I want to just bring in this last piece that I think is really important, is if there's any wisdom or advice that you would have to share with those who perhaps are still listening. I'm thinking of Rick's story and all the fear of like, why would we do this? And now it's like, why wouldn't we? But what wisdom or advice might you share with those who are watching and listening to this really important conversation today of moving forward and how to really resolve and maybe confront and create the medicine for that fear and separation that's so widespread and rampant out in our world today. So we'll start again with you, Andy.
Great, thank you. You know, when Temple made the decision to move to the Tri-Faith Commons, I would say there was some fear and trepidation, and unlike Countryside, we had to move. Our building was not meeting our needs, and so we had looked at a lot of properties before deciding on that one. But since that time, and that was, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, you know, I think a lot of people in our congregation have come to learn about other people and maybe opened our eyes in a way that we wouldn't have before, that when you're with people who are like-minded from a religious standpoint, ethnic standpoint, socioeconomic, political, you know, a lot of the conversations are about why your position is right. And I think that for me personally, I've learned a lot about maybe not agreeing with other people's positions, but at least hearing them. And before, I might not have even took the time to hear them or understand them or empathize with them. And so I would say it's been a process to get to that point, and that, you know, jumping into something like this is not without caution or fear, but you know, once you do, I think it just enriches your life in so many ways. And I would just encourage people. I'm not sure in our country right now we're doing enough listening, and I think we need to do more of that. And through that, I think we can break down some of the fear.
Great, thank you. The listening and the empathy that you bring, I think, is of utmost importance. Thank you for that. Rick?
Well, listening was one of the things I was going to mention, but which I believe is true. I think our life of faith is not about what we get out of it, but rather how God can transform us within. And too many times we don't look at it that way. One of the most recent, and in this experience as well, kind of is, I think, an eye-opener and a lesson, was actually last Sunday when Rabbi Stoller from Temple Israel spoke and gave the message at our church service. Again, being able to share what each other feels and learns has been valuable. But he said the message of moving from more of a transactional faith community to a more transformational kind of faith community. You know, we live in a on-demand kind of mentality. If you do X, God will do Y, and it sets people up for disappointment. And we transform ourselves. It's important to allow my heart and mind be shaped, I think, especially with all the outside forces that we have right now in the world. But being an agent for change is important. And I think by engaging with one another, no matter what your faith or your status of it may be, has more value than I think a lot of people realize. One of the benedictions that we always say, or our ministers say, during services or at different prayer times, is that we are loved beyond our wildest imagination. And I think if you open yourself up to seeing the value of relationships in the faith community, you will see that there's really no need for fear.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rick. And thank you for that idea of the internal transformation. If I look within, that's where I'll grow. That's where I'll transform. It's not about changing everyone out here. So thank you.
Exactly.
That was beautiful. And Sarah.
Well, I just want to say one thing, like ignorance is not a blessing. So I just want to take this opportunity, invite people to come to the campus, come to Tri-Faith campus, come tour our buildings, come get to know us, meet us, and then judge. Don't judge without knowing. So this is just my advice. Fear will happen if you don't know, and when you don't know, ignorance is not a good thing. Once you know, once you get to meet us, once you know, then you can judge, and then you're no more ignorant. So
beautiful. So important. Thank you, Sarah. And then Wendy, what can you add?
I think we live in a world that is really focused on individualism. And I think each of our religions come from collectivism, kind of tribal mentality. And I'm not certain that either one of those is the right answer. I think relationalism is the answer. And I think that the more that we come into relationship with each other and build trust, the brighter our future will be. And and I think that people don't know where to start. And the best place to start is to show up and not worry about whether you know the right thing to say or the right thing to wear or the right answer. Ask the person that you're going to visit whether or not there's a modesty code that is required to be in that space. Ask questions about dietary questions. We are all very open to having those conversations, and all we really want, like Sarah suggested, is to show up for each other. And each day we show up, and it's like compounding interest. These little teeny acts of goodness have created over a course of a decade really a beautiful initiative. And where it will take us in the next generation, we don't know yet, but certainly the future looks bright, and it's exciting to contrast so many other things that are happening in the world with this message of hope.
Thank you, Wendy. The thing, I'm going to share my takeaway, and then perhaps Kurt can wrap us up with any takeaways he has. But the one thing in listening to you all today that really moved me is the idea of this being so intentional gives you the freedom to really be more intentional. Like, you can ask that question, you can show up, you can take a tour, you can bring your families in. With it being this intentional, co-located community of this Tri-Faith initiative, it really does invite you into the depth and breadth of these relationships. So thank you from me, thank you for sharing yourselves, your learnings, who you are, and thank you for being there and being this model for the world. We really need you there. And so, Kurt.
Yeah, just to put this all in a nutshell, because we're so close on our thinking here, when things get difficult, and they're going to get very difficult for the world ongoing, the average person just normally, they'll either, for safety, they'll run to unity or they'll run to division. And it's about where they actually think in their heart of hearts safety is for them. And so one of the real mandates for all of us in this pan-religious community is to help people have that permission to try that running toward unity, to really ask ultimately where that safety is. And the model then for all of us to give that permission to create that welcoming attitude is, I think, a role that we all play. There's a writer now who says, everything is an opportunity, but every opportunity requires a permission. And that's really, really true. So I think that's a very unique role that each of us have. And again, I just want to thank you. I meet people like us every day, and then it makes my day when I meet more. So this has been a real thrill, especially being from Nebraska, to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you all. Thank you so much for being here and sharing yourselves. Thank you, Wendy, for organizing this. And we look forward to more conversations as we move forward. But thank you for this special edition for our 7 Days of Rest and Radiant Diversity. It's been a joy to share your story with our listeners. So thank you all.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.